So, Deltarune chapters 3 and 4 have been released for probably about 4 weeks at the time of making this video. Preferably I would have gotten this out way sooner because, my god, my mind has been filled with nothing but Tenna's dance and Gerson for the past month, but I guess you could say I was taken. In case you've missed what I've been posting about, I will be making a chapters 1 through 4 boss ranking, hopefully only coming out in about a week after posting this, so definitely excited for that. But before going so specific, I want to go on an overview of the 2 chapters. How good were they, what worked, what didn't, stuff like that. If you disagree with any of my opinions, please feel free to respectfully reply to them in the comments. Let's just keep things simple, guys. But with that out of the way, let's get straight into the video, and what better place to start than at chapter 3. And I'm going to be honest, I thought that chapter 3 was okay. I thought it had a lot of great elements and really fun moments, don't get me wrong, but this one seemed almost excessively flawed at points. While the last 2 chapters had great core ideas with some problems at their execution, this is one of the few Toby Fox things where the story outline felt underwhelming. But I do want to get across that there are a lot of base elements that were great, and the first on that list is the visuals. These things look better than ever. I love the work that was done on the Tenna introduction video, along with just Tenna's design in general. There's been a clear focus on getting the visuals to amplify the already very strong comedy in this chapter, and it paid off in dividends. Looking at this guy do his goofy flipping dances or just turn away to the corner when he's dejected is hilarious. I also think that the work done with all of the Zelda-like arcade machines was pretty cool. I think they emulated the style very convincingly, and it was a pretty great change of pace from the last 2 chapters. Was it a little strange to lose out on a bunch of Deltarune gameplay because of that? We'll get into it later. However, probably the best element of the chapter for me was Tenna at some points. Let's just focus on when he does work for now. And my god, he's goddamn hilarious! I've mentioned the visuals in the introduction video, but another big reason why it works is that this is the introduction to Tenna. This is our first impressions of him. What a damn way to set expectations. This manic energy does carry into a lot of his later scenes, and when the jokes work here, man do they. The rebuild my kids line I think actually had me on the floor on first playthrough. This makes it all the more interesting when the same personality and energy is transferred into something more sinister. I do have some issues with everything that happens on the Doom board, but you can't deny that the whole thing has a really unique style, and it was honestly one of the most memorable parts of the chapter. It almost felt dreamlike in a sense, and it provides a lot of interesting insight to his character. So yeah, the issue in this chapter definitely wasn't the base ideas. Rather, where I start to get disappointed is where these good aspects either stop before they're fully finished, or go on for way too long. The best example of this is the gameplay. I definitely had fun playing on both of the boards, and did so for the entire time I was playing on them, but it isn't enough to account for the fact that this isn't really what I got the game for. I got the game for Deltarune, and it's giving me Zelda. And this wouldn't necessarily be an issue if it didn't take up such a significant part of the chapter. Take chapter 2. In that chapter, they had a fair few different game modes. Beat 'em ups, mouse puzzles, boss fights, all of that. And despite the fact that there are a lot of parts that didn't feel particularly Deltarune, it still worked because it was A, switching up the gameplay styles a lot, and B, still had plenty of gameplay that felt like Undertale and Deltarune. You know, exploring rooms, running into enemies, solving puzzles. Meanwhile, in chapter 3, you don't get any gameplay that's like this until the last third. Is that not kind of insane? This actually impacts on more than just the gameplay too, because the visuals also suffer because of it. When you're stuck playing a parody of a lower quality game, the visuals follow suit. So many opportunities for grand, impressive visuals we see right at the end, are completely lost because so much of it is stuck in this deliberately lowbrow style. And I'm not even saying that the board sections are bad visually, it's just that it's such a limiting environment to be in. The visuals in the previous 2 chapters were definitely less polished, but there are more memorable and magical parts in those 2 than there were in the majority of this one. But that's not all too bad. These issues really just limit the chapter rather than actually making it worse. One thing that I'd say does make it worse is Tenna's backstory. I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion, but I could not, for the life of me, get invested in anything about why Tenna's doing what he's doing. I feel that the main issue with a lot of this game's core ideas is that the concept of inanimate objects coming to life and having beef with you is inherently funny. While the other chapters have been able to get past this through a number of different ways, you can really feel it in this one. While yes, abandonment issues and family trauma is a serious issue and something that I think wasn't done poorly here, I didn't get any of that on first playthrough. I mean, he's a TV, what did you expect? I don't know, it's certainly gotten better since then, and this isn't in any way diminishing Tenna's actual story, but I felt way less invested because, I don't know, he's a TV! But that's not the main takeaway I got after my first playthrough. Sure, things definitely felt incomplete, but all of my negative emotions mostly boiled down to confusion. So many of the negative aspects that I found in this game seem to have such incredibly easy fixes that it seemed like they shouldn't have been problems in the first place. I know I've already mentioned it, but a great example is the Zelda-style gameplay. Like, why would you make it so that in this chapter of Deltarune, you don't play Deltarune? Just give us Deltarune gameplay, you're so good at it. But that is kind of stretching it, since I would say that the gameplay is actually really good, and it's used in some pretty interesting ways, especially when you're looking for the Shadow Mantle. However, something that is in more line with this what were you thinking mindset, and also kind of ties to the gameplay style, is the grandness of the world. One thing I like about Toby Fox games is his world building. Not because it's especially detailed or abstract or any of that, but because he splits up his worlds really well and gives you a lot to reflect on when you look back at your journey. Undertale obviously has all of its different areas. Chapter 1 was visually a little messy but had that real feeling of adventure, and Chapter 2 arguably does the best job at this with great visuals and a strong thematic bond tying all of its aspects together. Meanwhile, Chapter 3 feels noticeably more constrictive. You do not get to explore the TV world until the last 30% of gameplay or so, because so much of the game is taken up by you sitting in a room and playing a different one. It's just another layer of suspension from what's actually going on, and it makes you feel like you didn't actually get up to doing that much throughout the entirety of the game. By the time you actually get to the TV world, it's honestly a little too late to be salvageable. It feels kind of linear despite the fact that there are quite a few branching paths, and a lot of that's because you just aren't given enough time to adapt to this kind of place. It feels like you're thrown in without really knowing how it works, and while that can be an effective way of storytelling in some cases, it really didn't click with me here. The only part of the game that really felt like you were exploring and progressing was the Shadow Mantle route. I've mentioned it a bit so far, and I'll probably get more into it in later videos, but I'd say that the way it gives you so much open space and lets you figure things out without any extra guidance at all is a way more effective at creating an engaging world. And it really is so confusing for this to be an issue. Either don't use the games or make the games take you around the TV world. Overall, this isn't necessarily awful or even bad, but it is one of the weakest aspects of the chapter for me. Now on to probably my least favourite part of the whole game. I did not like the ending of Chapter 3. The whole chapter was building itself up to be a self-contained mini-story, then threw in a bunch of heavily plot-relevant elements, but it did all of it way too late to actually pay off the elements that were being built up. First off, the knight introduction. Now, I did really enjoy that. I thought that the sound design was absolutely phenomenal, its design was amazing, and once you actually get to learn the boss fight, it is incredibly fun. But why is it here? Why is a battle on the main path? No matter what you do here, the knight introduction is always going to feel a little anticlimactic. The intended playing experience for most players in this situation is to encounter the knight, go into a boss fight with it, and die pretty much immediately. Like, yeah, what do you expect? I really do like the idea of the presumably main antagonist of the game having a stronger presence, but it felt like the wrong choice to have the gang face off against it. It left me feeling unsatisfied, something that only really left me when I went out of my way to play it as a secret boss. But like I've been saying a lot in this review, not that bad, just kind of strange. However, things mainly go downhill from here. After you get beaten, the knight tries steering Toriel for one reason or another, and then Undyne pops out of nowhere. What? Why are we including her now? Why right at the end of the chapter when nothing happens? She feels shoehorned in, like Toby forgot she was supposed to be a part of the chapter and decided to shove her right in at the end there. Anyways, the knight takes off with Undyne and instead traps her in the shelter. Susie then slams on the door a strangely large number of times and then goes back to seal the fountain. After this, Kris goes on their own to look at the keypad on the door, where we see a pine tree symbol, an officer badge, and the Deltarune. And while I know this isn't technically a cliffhanger, it's probably my least favourite cliffhanger ending in all of the 4 chapters. There's a couple reasons for this. It feels like it's only effective for people who are going to theorize about it, which excludes a large portion of the audience, while the other endings have been insane for anyone involved. Plus, it doesn't break any of the tension built up over the past 5 or 10 minutes. See, it just doesn't make sense. The story of this game literally goes from a pretty fun standard story to suddenly and inexplicably going absolutely haywire with incredibly important story aspects, but doesn't really give itself the time to make any of those feel earned, except maybe the knight in the secret boss round. But the main reason that I consider this the worst cliffhanger is that it clearly wants to be a cliffhanger. But somehow my 2 least favourite aspects of this ending both come in the credits. Firstly, it just reuses Until Next Time. Credit songs can be some of the most interesting, impactful OSTs in games, especially Deltarune, but this really just throws that out of the window for what? It hurts all the more for me because I really, really love Until Next Time, and I think it fits chapter 2 insanely well, so it's just frustrating to see it back here. Second, it ends with to be continued. I mean, yeah, obviously, we have the continuation already. I seriously don't know why I'm so annoyed at this one, and it's definitely a statement on the overall quality of the chapter if one of my least favorite elements about it is an incorrect statement at the end of the credits. But what are you talking about? No one is ever going to have to wait to play chapter 4 after finishing chapter 3. There's no to be in it. Okay, I think that's enough of that. Look, the ending definitely had some good aspects, but it was by far the most strange and underwhelming part of the game for me. It's the thing I always come back to after thinking about how chapter 3 is definitely the weakest chapter in the game. Before moving on, I just had a couple of other things I wanted to mention. First off, stealth mechanic. That was really funny. It felt like prime chapter 2 humor, and it was really what I wanted more of out of this chapter. I love how it became an actual gameplay mechanic rather than just being a one-off joke too. Very specific, but definitely a win. Also, there are other boss fights in this game. I'll absolutely be talking more about the most major ones in my boss fight ranking, so I figured I'd give my brief thoughts on the mini-bosses. Worst out of the way, the water cooler. I'm sorry, but everything I said about the ending details being my least favorite aspects of the chapter might be wrong because of this water cooler. I hope some of you guys found it funnier, but for me, this just felt like the most forced humor Toby Fox has ever made. It's not clever, it's just random equals funny, and the gameplay is abysmal. The hitboxes are so bloody weird, and the actual attacks hardly vary at all, and it's just such a random spike in difficulty that I actually died at this point. This isn't fun. Okay, negative thoughts out of the way, Lunino and El Nino. Pretty good. I wouldn't say that their boss fight is anything too notable, just kind of a standard mini-boss, but what I do like about them is how much of a presence they have in the chapter overall. It's really nice to have this recurring subplot rather than something like K-Round, which just appears twice, or the music trio, which are only in the first part of their chapter. And also, their love subplot is pretty engaging as well. That leads us on to Rules Card, and holy crap you guys, this is maybe the funniest boss fight in the whole game. The laser pointer bit actually made me die harder than anything else I've seen in gaming for the past couple of years, and the fact that it actually nails the physics of it is insane as well. Just absolutely hilarious, and one of the highlights of the chapter. The last thing I want to mention is the Shadow Mantle route, which I should speak about more in the next video as I've said before, but I'll say now is probably the most effectively scary aspect of the game. The repetition of that used up line actually gave me chills. To wrap things up, this chapter certainly wasn't bad overall. I knew I brought up a lot of negatives, but that's because the positives are kind of givens. Ralsei was wholesome as ever, Susie had great character work, the humor was great when it worked, but there were just a lot more issues than any other chapters, and they affected the overall quality a lot more. It's still at least a 6 out of 10 for me, if not a 7, so not a loss by any means, but a lot of my memory of the chapter is just a little negative. So now on to chapter 4, which I was definitely looking forward to more. I had a general idea of what chapter 3 was going to be about with its connections to Spamton, focus on Tenna and all of that, but I didn't really know anything about chapter 4, and the name Prophecy really did make me excited. And if I'm going to be honest, chapter 4 might be my new favorite chapter. It's such a step up from chapter 3, not just because of the things it does explicitly well, but the fact that there really aren't any significant negatives. I love the serene vibe present throughout the entire thing. I love the stuff done with Alsol and Kris, I love the additional lore, and I just generally thought that it was the strongest out of all the chapters as a cohesive unit. To start off with, I'm going to go into that vibe, because that is the best word to describe it. Vibe. The entire chapter, but especially once you get into the Dark World, is doused in this prophetic, surreal feeling, and it's so unique when compared to the previous chapters. It does a great job at redirecting the focus of the game from a light-hearted comedy into foreboding darkness, and it does this in a lot of ways. The first I want to mention is the soundtrack. The OST in this chapter is really strong, and I like how it has little themes and consistencies present to only this chapter. A good example is the strange time signatures in the Sanctuary themes. Having these strange, complex musical patterns as a world theme was a really interesting choice, and the melody fits into this complexity so well that I didn't even notice how messed up the time signature was on first playthrough. It gets the idea across that the world that you're in is very natural, very ancient, not constructed by what people think is normal today. I also appreciate the change in sound fonts. Toby Fox is well known for making transcendent melodies and then plopping them into a sound font from Doo Doo Dingus's Squeeble Adventures on the Nintendo 32, but a lot of the music in this game sounds orchestral and it fits in super well. My personal highlight is Guardian. Man, what a final boss theme. Not only a final boss theme, but a final boss theme for something that's been built up since the first 15 minutes of chapter 1. It ties a great bow around the chapter and encapsulates what makes it so much more different than anything else we've gotten so far. Another stylistic that is done well is the visuals, specifically the colour scheme. I like how it's blue. I don't know much about colour theory. No, but this chapter's visuals also help with this prophetic sense, and I just generally think that it's the best looking chapter so far. The one aspect that has gotten better as the game has gone along is the visuals. Chapter 1 was kind of bleh, Chapter 2 was a big step up, Chapter 3 had some definite highlights, and now we have this. Look at this cutscene! That is seriously the coolest boss introduction I've seen since my Shadow of the Colossus days. Not only that, but a lot of backgrounds have this unearthly feel with this really well used parallax effect, like the Bell Room or the Prophecy Room. And like I mentioned before, the colours are great. They stay very consistent throughout the whole thing, and it adds a lot of ambience to the world. I specifically like Gerson's office, where the sudden change into warmer colours makes it feel so warm and comfy. Overall, this is definitely the most visually pleasing chapter we've gotten, and it also has some absolutely insane looking sequences. Another thing that adds to this vibe is not the lack of humour, but the different style of humour. The previous chapters have had a lot of random or unexpected comedy, most memorably and effectively with Spamton in Chapter 2. And while Chapter 4 does have a fair bit of this, most of its humour originates more from the characters' interactions rather than the things happening to them. A good example is the scene where Gerson wants Susie to grab the book from the shelf. In the previous chapters, the joke would have been that Ralsei was doing something silly and goofy, but here the focus is shifted more onto Gerson still insisting Susie needs to help him and Susie begrudgingly doing so. Alongside this, most of the gags aren't their own thing. They're more add-ons to the story or object interactions, unlike previously where we've gotten Rule's card or that water cooler, where they were purely there to be gags. Essentially what I'm trying to say is that the humour here is used to amplify the characters, not be the characters. However, that wouldn't be a good call if the characters on their own weren't good. Well, my friends, I think it's time we got into my favourite aspect of the chapter. The character work in Chapter 4 was probably the main weight on the scale that tipped me over into believing that Deltarune could be an improvement over Undertale. And if you know how much I adore Undertale, you understand that I do not say that lightly. Both Susie and Ralsei get some really interesting development throughout the entirety of the chapter. Gerson is a surprisingly fantastic addition, and most of this is as good as it is because the chapter was fully focused on it. The character I've got to start with is obviously the main character, Susie. I say that kind of as a joke, but also kind of as a compliment to how the story's turning out. First off, holy crap, Susie has pretty much metamorphosized. I was replaying Chapter 1 again, and she was pretty much unrecognizable. Her character progression has been so realistic throughout the game's lifespan, but it has got to be the best here. I love how relatable her conflict is. She's accepted, she's with her circle of friends, but they have their roles too. She still feels constricted, but she keeps denying that because she doesn't feel like she has the right to. That feeling hits really close to home for me, and I can't imagine how many others feel the same way. But she overcomes these feelings. She starts coming up with ideas, with strategy, starts working on her magic abilities. By the end of the chapter, she's not as good as these as she may have wanted to be at the start, but that doesn't matter, because she regained her confidence and gets to be herself even more. It adds a whole new layer to her character, and just makes me even more excited for what she's going to deal with next. Of course, she couldn't have done any of that without Gerson, who is perhaps the most based character Toby Fox has ever made. I've never been more certain that I'm rooting for someone in my entire life. Guy literally died, was brought back to life in a freaking alternate dimension, immediately started teaching this child the power of self-love, wrote a letter to his son, then almost single-handedly brought down a titan. He reminds me of characters like Oogway or Yoda that just have so much compassion and you just have to love them. And Gerson is no different. He plays such a vital role in Susie's arc, and the way his true character is slowly revealed was definitely engaging. I specifically loved the scene where Susie realizes he's been dead. It's such a chilling moment, and even if you as the player knew the truth, it doesn't dampen the shock because you just get so invested in this guy. The other character who gets the most development is Ralsei, and geez Louise, what an absolute 180 in one chapter. Ralsei really went from the soft, lovable, marketable team member to the one with the most trauma in a very short amount of time. While I would say that I prefer the other two in this arc, it does very much feel like Ralsei's development has only just begun, and I'm definitely excited to see what happens next. That scene at the very end where he just kind of collapses under the pressure has stuck with me ever since I first played with, not just because of how it progresses Ralsei, but also how it progresses Ralsei and Kris's relationship. When the shared body stuff comes crashing down, I was originally only worried about how Susie was going to take it, but now I reckon Ralsei might have an even harder time with it, unless he knows about it through the prophecy. Speaking of which, I like how it tied into his fear of the prophecy, and especially the one part of it that he's not letting anyone see, but I'll get into that a little more in the ending. Next thing I'm going to touch on is the lore in this chapter. I mentioned it before, but this is the first chapter where it feels like the dark world that we're in isn't the main focus. This one feels like we're exploring the concept of dark worlds, the prophecy, the night, all of that. I think that's definitely a direction that we need to take the storyline at this point of the game, and as an introduction, this chapter does a pretty good job at it. I think it was an interesting choice to include the idea of fate so heavily, but if that's where the story's going, then they set it up well here. Fate was definitely best executed in this chapter in the Gerson secret boss, with someone so will-powered that even after being given a dark crystal, decided to rewrite his own story. It's also good for the upcoming chapters, since the idea of this all-knowing prophecy dictating everything that the characters will do can feel pretty constricting and is pretty problematic most of the time, so introducing the idea of going against it was a great call. There's also everything done with the Titan, which while I do have issues with it, I also loved a lot about it. Most notably, the visuals. This cutscene, its design, its attacks is the best looking thing we've gotten out of this game, and it's not really that close. Actually, the Tenna fight was also pretty close, but this one is just so much more impactful. It also really ups the stakes for a great climactic conclusion, which I was worried we were going to miss out on when I first played through. It shifts the focus from everything going on around you right onto this absolute behemoth, which is a great thing to say about a climax. Anyways, the next thing I wanted to bring up was the light world section. Since 3 was really lacking in this respect, I was glad to see that we got to spend a fair portion of this chapter exploring what's happening in the light world. I liked a lot of little things about it, like how they set up the church early on, how Susie and Kris are such good friends, and the whole back and forth looking around for the information after service. But obviously the most memorable part of this section is the part where we get to Noelle's house. I've got to say that out of the 3 parts of this chapter, this being the first dark world being the second, and everything after being the third, this is probably my least favourite part. I didn't think it was bad, and it's clearly here to mainly set up future conflict, but I do think that it could have been improved a little. Once you leave Kris's body and start exploring, I do think that there were some issues with the execution, mainly with you and Kris. If I could be honest, I don't think it was a great idea to have Kris become this recurring obstacle. It dials down the intimidation that I felt for them previously, because now they're just another thing to get past where you can learn the attack patterns. I don't know, I don't doubt that this plotline will still be immensely impactful, but this did put a bit of a damper on it all. Also, I don't really like Carol as an antagonist. She's just kind of a mean parent, and even if she does have some connection with the Knight, I really don't care about her at all. But those two things aren't all too bad, and I definitely did like plenty of stuff about this section. I think it was a good idea to flesh out Susie and Noelle's relationship more, alongside fleshing out Kris and the Soul's individuality. It was pretty raw to see Susie and Noelle be afraid of you and be absolutely oblivious to what's going on. It's also good to get some pretty solid meme moments with Kris just beating up the Soul with a broom. But honestly, I think all of this pales to the weird route changes. Holy crap, what an absolutely chilling scene. It's kind of frustrating to be sent back to the start when you say the wrong thing, but I couldn't really care less when they include something this paralyzing. Noelle becoming more and more afraid of you, starting to realize that something's going wrong, noticing things from a dream, oh my god. And Kris letting out all of their anger and frustration on the Soul after, yes, this is what the conflict should be. Kris absolutely despising us for ruining their life. It's clear that the weird route is more of an add-on to the main story than anything, but with the plot points that we've gotten so far, I don't think that I'd have it any other way. Okay, so I've done a lot of praising on this chapter, but is there anything that I really dislike? Well, I mentioned what happened in the light world, but other than that, not really. It's just generally really strong, and there's not really any aspect that you could say is significantly worse than any other. I'll say that it's definitely less fun and light-hearted than the previous chapters, but it does make up for it with its focus on lore and the darker tone. I'd also say that it's less exciting, which is pretty frustrating for a chapter where you fight a Titan, but that aforementioned serene vibe does kind of come to replace it. I suppose the only other thing I'll say is that I find it weird that we do go up against and defeat a Titan at this point in the game. By now, we've used 2 of the highly agreed final bosses for the entire thing, those being the Knight and a Titan, and while the Knight is still highly intimidating and definitely returning, I don't think it was handled quite as well here. I hope that in Chapter 5 they mentioned something about the trio being much stronger in the Dark World, or maybe that what they defeated was just a hatchling, because I don't feel the same amount of terror around these guys that I once used to. I still definitely enjoyed the battle, and I think a lot of things were done right in painting a picture that it's a beast of pure, incomprehensible darkness, but I stopped viewing them as villains and started viewing them as forces of nature. But hey, if the Knight swoops in to be that villain, then I wouldn't say we've lost all too much in the process. The last thing I wanted to touch on is, poetically enough, the ending. I don't know, this part has just probably been the thing most on my mind after playing the game. Chapters 1 and 2 definitely had more holy crap stuff is happening endings, but I think this fits with its chapter even more. Chapter 4 is a very quiet, contemplative gameplay experience, and the ending really captures that more and more. You've just defeated a titan, saved the world, you're the heroes the prophecy said you'd be, but it can't feel triumphant. That same prophecy has also told both Susie and Ralsei that something awful is going to happen, and both of them feel powerless to stop it. Ralsei clearly can't take the pressure of bearing it anymore, and despite his best efforts, Susie now has to share that load. After this immense battle, you're sent back to the real world, where it's revealed that everyone that you thought you were saving wasn't in the dark world at all, and a lot of the reason that you went in the first place was all for nothing. You're sent back to the light world, where no one knows what you've done. Hell, I even think the jitterbug ties into this really well. Toriel, Kris's mother, can't celebrate them because she's too busy being drunk and listening to party music. As I got to this part, it kind of dawned on me that the Fun Gang can't really do that anymore. They can't do nice things like that, not after seeing what they've seen and thinking about what's going to come next. It's such a foreboding way to end the set of 2 chapters, but a part of that I have to bring up is after the credits. Neverending Night, an absolutely gorgeous track, has been slowly building up for the past minute or so, letting everything that's happened just set in, melancholy as ever, and then it all just stops. It loses the instruments, loses the rhythm, until all you're left with is that high melody ringing through. Then, the mystery person speaks directly to you. Well done. The halfway mark has been attained. But it is still waiting. How much longer now? My Deltarune. I'm going to be real with you, Chief. This might be my favourite moment in Deltarune, and I cannot wait for the stuff that goes down in Chapter 5. But yeah, Chapter 4 is really something special. While I do get more aggressively positive over aspects of the first and second chapters, I do have to say that this is one of the highest in quality. It really sets up the future chapters well, and it's a great experience to play through it. So yeah, that's my thoughts on each of the chapters. Sure, I dogged on Chapter 3 a fair bit, but this is really shaping up to be a fantastic game and story. The different plot lines with Kris and the Soul fighting each other, Ralsei hiding the prophecy, the Knight creating fountains, the Shelter holding a bunch of secrets, and many more, are all supremely interesting to me, and I'm most excited to see how they intersect. I really enjoyed playing through these chapters, but I probably enjoyed discussing them even more. And yes, the boss ranking is the next video coming out. Ideally, I would have gotten this video out probably a week and a half ago, but stuff happened, as it's known to do. But with that out of the way, thanks for watching. Feel free to comment your thoughts on the chapters, and if you're inclined, drop a like or a sub. But all in all, rebuild the set, rebuild my kids, and cue the outro music.